remember.
See you later, Lloyd.
Okay, glad you came,
Talk, man.
Frank.
Been here through it.
I went home there, may not have written it on this, in this one. All of us had
No,
ill effects,
that doesn't mark me.
still have it now. I can't eat any highly seasoned food. I was always crazy about chili when I was growing up and until I was a prisoner of war, but I can't eat it now. It's on our menu at the cafeteria fairly often, but I never ordered because I don't like the results. My stomach won't take it.
Good afternoon, Mr. Smith. I'm John Faris, and I've been given the honor of asking you some questions today about your life and your experiences in World War II. We've spent a little time here before we started this video, and I'd like to go through some of the things. I know we've just been over them, but I'd like for everybody to know who you are and what you've been through. Is that okay?
That's fine with me.
I guess the best place to start with is I need to know your full name. I know it's Lloyd W. Smith, Jr. What does the W stand for?
William
And your friends call you?
Lloyd.
Will it be okay if I call you that?
Very well.
Lloyd, tell me a little bit about your family, where you grew up. I knew you grew up in Sumner, Mississippi.
That's right.
And tell us what your dad and mom did and how many were in your family.
My dad was a Ford automobile salesman at York Motor Company in Tutwiler. When I was born, I've got to back up. I was born in Sumner. We moved to Tutwiler because my daddy had an offer to be a salesman at York Motor Company in Tutwiler, and he accepted that because it was a good job.
Were they selling Model A's, Model T's? What were they selling back then?
It was Model A's. T's were already not out of circulation, but out of production. Ford Motor Company, now you may have to scratch that. Ford Motor Company broke their deals by overstocking them, requiring them to buy more cars than they could sell. That broke Mr. York. So Daddy was out of a job. He moved to Sumner, moved his family to Sumner, and he worked in a grocery store for Mr. Ed Turner for several years, and that job played out for a reason I'm not going to. Well, yes, I'm going to tell you too. His son, Gaston Turner, had been employed over in Georgia, and he lost his job. So Mr. Turner said, Lord, I've got to let you go, bad as I hate to. You're a good clerk, but I can't hire you and Gaston too. And naturally, my son is going to get the job.
What was your mother doing at this time?
Her home was Kilmichael, Mississippi. She was brought up and schooled in Kilmichael. She was a school teacher after she graduated from high school. There was no requirement then that the teacher had to be a college graduate. So she went directly into teaching. And they were both for some reason, well, mother was teaching in New Light, Louisiana, and for some reason, daddy was down there, and they met and married, and moved back to Sumner, which was my daddy's hometown, and after my daddy lost that job with Mr. Turner, he opened a grocery store of his own, and our financial status picked up. A difference in $40 a month salary and the whole cheese. I helped him from the time I was 12 years old when he opened that store until we left there and went and moved back to Kilmichael. Now, do you want me to continue to?
Let's talk a little bit about your brothers. I understood that you had an older brother and a younger brother.
Now, all three of them were younger than I was. I was the oldest of the three. Raymond died of prostate cancer 15 years ago. I have, he's 2 years and 10 months younger than me. Gordon is 9 years younger than me. Roland came along late in my parents' life. He is 19 years younger than me.
So you still have two brothers that are still alive?
Yes.
And your brother that's deceased, I understood that he was in the United States Navy in World War II.
Yes.
Okay. You told me an interesting story about that I do nothing about, so I think people would be interested in hearing that. I'd ask you the question before we got started: were you an enlisted man? That is, did you go ahead and join the military, or were you drafted? Tell, ladies and gentlemen, at that time, why really everybody that went into the military was technically drafted and not enlisted. Why were they doing it that way?
Our then president was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He had the access to all the records, of course, and he saw that the volunteers were going to the Air Corps, which it was at that time, Air Corps, or the Navy, and he had to have foot soldiers. So he cut out all enlistments. All military enrollees came in with the draft board.
Now you wanted to be the minute the war broke out on December the 7th, 1941, is really when the United States got directly involved in the war. You were just 18 years old, right?
Yes.
And you wanted to join.
I wanted to leave Northwest Junior College at Senatobia, Mississippi, and go into the Air Corps. My parents were not sold on that idea. They said, hold off, don't go in right now. I went on and finished that year of school and started the next one, and I just couldn't stand it any longer. I had to go. I didn't think the U.S. could win the war without me.
Well, and you know, that's probably true. You and a lot of people like you.
Yeah.
So you told me that
Yes.
you've got a trade that you thought might get you where you wanted to go, and that is to the Army Air Corps. What did you do to get to where you wanted to be?
I went to a welding school over at Greenville. It was a 6 or 7 week school, I don't remember which. I got my diploma from that, and then went back and talked to the head of the draft board and told him I was ready to be drafted. He was glad to have somebody to volunteer for that, because the young men that were not married and didn't have children were getting scarce. They had drafted all of the free ones, the single ones. And I was in the next draft, which was the second day of January of 1941.
Would that have been 42 though?
42, I'm sorry, 1942.
Now, a lot of people don't know, I've been in the military and I understand some of these things, so I'm going to ask you some questions. When you first were, quote, drafted, even though you had actually volunteered, where did you go to train to be an Air Corpsman?
I went to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, to
Basic training there?
basic training. Then I went to Keesler at Biloxi.
And that's where you got your advanced training?
Yes.
Were you trained, of course, there weren't a lot of pilots back then. How did you end up, I know you ended up being a turret gunner on a B-17 bomber. How did they select you for that position? Was it just by chance, or how did you end up being a ball turret gunner?
I requested that, and what added to my eligibility for that was my size and weight. It takes a small man to be a ball turret gunner, or a tail gunner in a B-17, or a B-24. They both have ball turrets.
Would you explain I've seen all the World War II aircraft because I'm a pilot and I go to Oshkosh, Wisconsin every year, and they have all these World War II aircraft there that we can go inside and look. Tell the folks what a ball turret gunner was and where was it located on the airplane?
It was underneath the bottom side of the fuselage, immediately behind the radio compartment. And it was, as the name implies, a sphere. It had two 50 caliber machine guns and a place for a small man to sit down and still be able to see out that round glass, thick glass, peephole there, and see what he was shooting at.
As I understand it, being the belly gunner or the ball turret gunner was a very dangerous place because that's where the enemy aircraft felt was the weakest part of the airplane, didn't they?
That and the tail, until the Air Corps started placing a man and a gun, two guns, 50 caliber machine guns in the tail, that was a very vulnerable place. But it immediately changed after a lot of German planes had been shot down by the tail guns. Now the ball turret was a vulnerable place, anti-aircraft wise. Anti-aircraft shells burst all around. And
you're basically hanging out there below the plane, weren't you?
Yes. Well, I was in about half in and half out. If anything had happened to me and I had gotten shot, if that ball turret stopped spinning, then the waist gunners would note that, and they would have got me out of that.
You're talking about this sphere that you were in. It's basically a big glass ball, right?
No, it was metal,
Okay.
with glass, a real thick glass in front that I looked through, but it was metal.
Did it spin around? Did you have controls inside of it that would cause the gun to spin around?
Yes. Yes, the gun spun as I spun, and there were buttons, triggers. No, they were buttons on the end of handle that I turn to control the ball turret. And when I press those guns, those triggers, the gun's shot. Just press that button.
You, in a B-17 bomber, did y'all have to wear oxygen during these flights?
Above 12,000 feet we did. And the rules said from at night flying, you had oxygen from the ground up. But when we got to 12,000 feet, the pilot would say, oxygen time, and we put our mask on.
How high would you fly in most of these bombing raids?
From 29,000 to 35,000 feet. It depended on the visibility a lot.
Now, you told me that prior to being shot down, that you were flying out of an airfield in England, is that correct?
Yes.
And that tells me that you would fly across the English Channel, across the North Sea, and depending on where your target was in Germany.
Yes.
And you had been on 7 missions before your plane was shot down.
This was my 7th mission.
Okay. Do you remember what the intended target was that day, on the day that you got shot down?
It was Brunswick, Germany.
And had you already released your bombs at the time you were shot down?
We had released our bombs at the same time that the plane up above us released theirs. And one of their bombs hit our number 4 engine, which is their right side outside engine. And I don't know why, but I happened to have my guns faced that way, and I saw it. I didn't see
Did it explode, or did it just hit it?
No. Bombers, the bombs in bombs had safety mechanisms that wouldn't let that bomb go off until that little propeller on the shaft had made 1,500 revolutions. That released the propeller and armed the bomb, and it would explode then. We were fortunate. There just weren't many feet between us and that bomber up above us. If I had been, I wouldn't be here.
Sure. Did it take the engine off, or did it hit the propeller, or what did it do?
It hit the propeller and twisted it so it couldn't be feathered. Feather means stop it from turning. And it was twisted up real bad. Of course, we didn't get to see it outside the plane because we went down in the water.
Tell me a little bit about that. At the time you dropped the bomb, you still had 3 of your 4 engines functioning, right?
Yes. Yes.
And then I suppose you were turning to head back to England at that time.
Yes, we couldn't maintain that altitude on 3 engines, so we had to leave the formation. And we hit the deck, so to say. That's the phrase for that. We hit 1,000 feet and stuck there. We flew. Do you want me to go into detail there?
I think that would be interesting. Y'all were trying to make it back to England. You had to drop from 30,000 something feet down to 1,000 feet.
Yes.
And did that make you more vulnerable to the enemy aircraft and or the anti-aircraft fire?
It didn't in itself, but there were 2 enemy fighters followed us down that 30, approximately 30,000 feet, firing at us, but the Lord was with us. They hit us, they hit the plane, but they didn't hit a single man. We, let me get my thoughts together. We flew all the way across to Belgium, to the Dutch coast. That's where we went out 23 miles, and third, well, I didn't tell you about the third one, but enemy planes got the second engine. Our third engine we lost probably from flak before we left the formation, but it just took it that long to die. When that third one died, the one engine couldn't take us, couldn't maintain any altitude at all. So when we got 23 feet,
Miles,
23 miles from the
Belgian coast.
Belgian coast, we hit the water.
When you hit the water, a lot of people don't realize that that's a pretty significant impact.
It is a tremendous impact. It broke every two sections. It separated every two sections of each wing. Cables held them dangling together in the water. They floated naturally. And
How many people were on your plane when it went down?
10,
And did all 10 get out?
yes.
Did y'all have life rafts or any sort of lifeboats as part of the equipment on the plane?
Each wing had one rubber dinghy, 5-man dinghy. It was yellow to attract help from above, and I'm jumping ahead. We floated out there in that ice cold water for 5.5 to 6 hours, having to bail water out of those dinghies with our hands.
Was the sea rough at that time?
It was rough. It was extremely rough, and it was rough enough that it tore two circles that the ropes were tied through. There were 3 sections, 3 groups of 2, one on each, 3 of them on each dinghy, and we tied them together. We thought we would stay together that way, but by the time we were picked up, 2 of them had already broken, and 2 men had to stop their dipping water out of the dinghies and hold the other dinghy so that we could stay together. That had several reasons. We didn't want to be separated from our rest of our crew, and 2 dinghies made a larger target for them to see anybody flying over. Could see 2 of them much more readily than they could see 1.
Did y'all have any flares or anything like that to try to draw attention to where you were located?
We had flares, and had a flare going in each dinghy. When the day started waning and it got darker, we didn't fire a flare until we heard a plane in the distance. We started firing a flare every few minutes until that plane got over us. And we saw that it was a German Ju-88.
A junker?
And we couldn't, our luck played out on us at that point. Of course, we were blessed by the Lord to be picked up by anybody, but we waited 25 or 30 minutes at least, if not longer, for that radio message to get from that plane to the
German
To-
Navy out there.
to the excuse me just a minute, to a boat that was waiting in the harbor for that purpose, to pick up enemy crews, airplane crews. And that plane, that boat got to us. He picked us up. I was in the second dinghy, away from the boat, and at the far corner. So that made me the last man to get out of the dinghy. Well, the captain of that boat was getting mighty afraid. We had been too long loading. He was afraid that British planes would come over and spy us. So when I got in there, we were nearly frozen. We had sat down in that ice water, bailing water out. And when I got there, up on the deck, that captain thought he'd speed us up. So he kicked me as hard as he could kick me. We were in line. I fell into the next man. He fell into the next man. That's how hard he kicked me. But I didn't feel it. You heard about the dead end kids, that was maybe before your time, but that was a dead end kids, and I was a dead end kid. All of us were. We were sitting down in that ice water. Had been there so long. And of course, we knew we were prisoners. We knew they were our captors. And I got myself up and got back in line. I didn't say a word, which was the only thing to do. They took us. Do you want to ask a question or me continue?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. I realized they took you by boat back to the Belgian coast, and then how did they take you to the prisoner of war camp?
They first took us to a Belgian dungeon there, not far from the place where the boat landed. I don't remember how we got there. It was a little too far to walk, as well as I remember. I guess they had transportation there for us, and took us to that dungeon. The dungeon, each cell had one bed in it, single bed, one man cell. Each cell had a door and no windows. That door came about that for 2.5 inches from the floor for them to slide food through. And also it had a little air hole up at the top. It was about, as well as I remember, I may be exaggerating, it was about 18 feet to the ceiling. Why they had such tall ceilings, I don't know. What anybody asked. We stayed there for about 3 days in the dungeon. And they asked if anybody wanted to see a doctor. I told you our crew chief was hurt worse than I was, I thought. And he went. And I knew when they came back in because I heard the prison door open and close. His name was Charles Heck. I said, Heck, did they do you any good? He said, no, they gave me 6 pills that looked like aspirin, and expected that to help me. It didn't, they didn't help me. And so I didn't go to the doctor. That was the reason. If they didn't help him, they weren't gonna help me.
So when they shipped you out after about 3 days, how did they transport you to, I understand that you ended up in Stalag 17B,
Yes,
which was a famous POW camp, right?
yes, it was. They transported us in 48 cars. That was a World War I freight car. It was so named because the car was designed to hold 40 men or 8 horses. They had a veterans organization, I think it was a branch of American Legion, that was named 40 and 8. We went that distance from the prison in Belgium over to 17B, over to Krems, Austria, by way of that those 40 and 8 cars, and we were taken out to the 40 and 8 prison camp in trucks.
How many, I realize all 10 of your crew, they had you all together. Were there other POWs that were put into rail cars and trucked across Europe?
There was some more that same day. We had, the volunteer gunner had a heated suit because he was down below. He didn't get the benefit of any of the airplane's heat. We stayed fairly comfortable down there because of that heated suit. We gave up our heated suits when we got to the camp. I'm telling you something you didn't give you a chance to ask about because you probably wouldn't have known to ask. We had a radio man in every B-17, and they knew how to make a radio out of more or less available scraps. They had to have wire, so they begged my heated suit from me. I told them, you can and after they told me what they were going to do with it, I said, you can have it after you get me something else to wear. It was still cold, and they got me a GI uniform, and I stripped off and gave them that heated suit. They slipped it behind the German guards and all of the crew members and went out the window with it. There was a man waiting outside the window that took that and put it to use.
How long were you at Stalag 17B?
Now, we were on a forced march the last month, so I was there, let me back up. I stayed in Belgium, in that prison, until they could send back to the States, and through their excellent spy system, find out all about me. They told me more about my training than I could have told them. Named every base, and the day I went there, the day I left, that was, I'd call an excellent spy system. That's what we were up against. And now, I've lost the question.
Okay, the question was, they they took you by train over to Stalag 17. How long were you actually in the POW camp at Stalag 17?
All right, I had to wait between 2 and 3 weeks there for them to get that information back. And they sent us to the camp. We were there 10 to 15 days off of 13 and a half months. And we were on the forced march most of a month. And in the Birmingham woods,
So just about a year in the Stalag. If you were captured for 13 and a half months, right?
yes, yes.
And
Approximately a year, yes.
approximately a year. Now, one of the things that none of us can comprehend is how were you treated as a prisoner of the Germans in Stalag 17?
We were prisoners of the Luftwaffe. Luftwaffe had charge of Stalag 17B.
Now, a lot of people won't know who the Luftwaffe was. That was the German Air Force.
Yes. Since they were airmen themselves, the guards were, they were a little more lenient on American airmen than the regular old Army hardshell guards had been. Certainly than the SS troops would have been. They were reasonable with us. If we didn't obey the instant we got an order, we could get the butt of a gun across our backs. But we soon learned, I never was hit, but we soon learned to be prompt with an answer and be prompt with the movement when they told us to do something.
Not like you had a choice, right?
That's right.
Were there other prisoners from other countries there in the Stalag with you?
Yes, there were 2,200 of us Americans, and there were British, French, Russians, a lot of Russians started out, a lot of them died.
Did they treat the Russians differently than they did the French and the British and the Americans?
They certainly did.
Do you know why?
Well, after World War I, the Russian government refused to sign what's called the Geneva Convention agreement, which protected prisoners of war. It had other clauses in it, but what we were interested in was the prisoner of war protection, and the Germans honored that. I'll give them credit; they honored every bit of it.
But since the Russians hadn't signed it, did they honor it with the Russians?
They didn't. That convention agreement didn't exist as far as they were concerned.
And what did that mean to the Russian prisoners?
It meant death to a lot of Russian prisoners. They didn't get as much food as we did, and we barely got enough. I was told when I got out of our forced march that I weighed approximately 95 pounds. We didn't have any scales. That was a guess. But once again, I forgot the question.
We were talking about how they treated the Russians versus how they treated the French and the British and the Americans.
Okay. Every morning, the Russians were required to haul their dead from their part of the camp to Russian Hill. It was so named because nobody was buried in that cemetery, if you could call it a cemetery. It's just a pile of graves, except Russians. We, several times, very frequently, we would hear a gun shoot. And that meant one less Russian soldier, one less Russian prisoner. Sometimes it wouldn't be a fatal shot, instantly fatal. We would hear that prisoner holler, and then he would holler again, a little weaker, and 5 or 6 hollers he was dead, and we didn't hear it anymore. As I said, they didn't get quite as much food as we did. They knew just exactly how much it took to keep a man alive, and they didn't feed us any more than that. They didn't feed the Russians that much.
During the time that you were there, were any Americans killed?
There was one man killed, only one man. He had been wounded in his head, had a head injury, and it affected his mind. He didn't want to go home in that shape. So he started climbing the fence. He knew what that was going to result in. It was a suicide, and they accommodated him. They killed him.
So that was the only one?
That was the only one.
Toward the end, as the war started to wind down, I suppose that the Germans that were guarding you there realized that it was time to abandon the Stalag. But rather than leaving y'all there, what did they force you to do?
When they heard the sound of the Russian guns, that meant they were pretty close to us, within a few miles. They called us out before daylight and said, "Gather up your belongings, we're going on a march." That was no hard assignment, because we didn't have any belongings except a change of clothes and our blankets. One blanket and one change of clothes. So we were ready in 5 minutes, and we started out on a forced march from Stalag 17B to the Austro-German border, a town named
Brunel?
Renau, I had forgotten.
How far was that, by the way?
My guess was 250 miles. And they furnished no water and no food for that time. Now, there'd been a lot more American deaths if the American Red Cross hadn't sent us food parcels. Each parcel weighed approximately 8 pounds. And as long as the Germans had trains to bring the parcels from Switzerland to our camp, we ate fairly well. Nobody starved. We were all hungry, but we got a food parcel at first once a week. As the war progressed and the German trains got scarcer, American and British gunners took care of those, and eventually they couldn't bring any parcels to us. But I'll give them credit. They needed to haul their own war supplies, the Germans did, but they, according to the Geneva Convention, were obligated to bring those food parcels to us, and they complied with that part of the agreement.
How long tell me about, you said it was 250 miles.
That's a guess.
Yeah, how many days were y'all on this march?
My guess is 20 to 25.
So y'all would have had to make at least 10 to 15 miles a day?
Yes. in the bad health condition that we were in and the bad weather conditions that we had and the high altitude, we were marching through mountains, and sometimes there'd be a valley, but it was mostly mountainous. It was a hard day's work.
You said you told me earlier that this would have been in sometime in April of 1945?
No,
Or 44, excuse me.
1944. No,
No, I believe it would
you're
have been
right.
45.
It was in 45, yes.
But you had been there almost a year. And you had been shot down in March the year before, and
Yes,
this
yes,
was like 13 months or so later.
yes, I stand corrected that. It was 45. Oh,
Tell me a little bit about, I mean, I've camped out a lot and I was in the Army, but y'all didn't have any tents?
No.
You didn't have any cooking gear to cook food with? No canteens for water?
each Red Cross parcel had a tin can in it that had a pound of powdered milk. So we saved some of those cans and put water in it.
How'd you sleep at night?
Each prisoner had one army blanket that the Red Cross had furnished. We put one blanket down on the snow or on the wet ground, and we kept our clothes on the whole time we were marching, day and night. And we used the other prisoners' blanket to cover with. We depended on our GI clothing and 2 blankets and body heat to keep us from freezing.
I believe you told me that 2 of you slept on the blanket on the ground and you covered yourselves up with the blankets on top.
That's right.
What about any bathroom or latrine facilities available to y'all while you were marching?
Not until we got to the woods which was our destination. They dug a large square hole, which was our latrine, no cover.
Now, as you got to the woods on the German-Austrian border, General Patton in the 3rd Army shows up.
Yes, the 3rd day we were there, they showed up.
I believe we had talked a little bit about that Adolf Hitler had given the order to Himmler to kill all the POWs toward the end of the war, when it was obvious that the war was not going to be won by the Germans.
That was just before Hitler committed suicide, he and his lady friend. And he knew he lost the war, so he said, kill all prisoners of war. Be they American, English, British, Russian, British instead of English, because there were 3 countries involved in Britain, and French, Russians, and it seems to me like there's another nationality there too. We never did come in contact with them, because we had our own compounds. We lived within those compounds, and we didn't see anybody else. Except, as I told you, when the Russians brought their dead past our door on the street in front of our barracks.
So, how did Patton and the 3rd Army show up? What was the first thing you knew about him even being there?
Well, I was told later that the Germans contacted Americans somehow and told them where we were located and asked them to come take us off of their hands.
I suppose that the Germans were extremely concerned about being captured or caught by the Russians because of the enmity between the two countries.
Absolutely.
So,
They would not be captured by the Russians. If they had to use their own guns on themselves, they would have shot themselves. Majority would.
tell me, did you ever see Patton himself when he came in?
No, I didn't.
I understood that you told me that Patton actually rode into the camp
Yes.
in the
yeah.
woods there in his Jeep and told the Germans to take their guns off of y'all because they were the prisoners now.
That's right.
When you were liberated, how did they take you and where did they take you?
As I said, the Germans protected us then, guarded us from the outside, because there was a lot of hostility among the Germans and Austrians against us. Just a second, see if I can gather my thoughts.
So obviously they had some discussions with the American soldiers that they would protect y'all from the general population.
Yes, yes. That was for our own protection that they turned the guns the other way.
Where did they take you after you left the woods there at Renau?
They took us to the coast, Dutch coast. They had 5 camps set up there in advance, named for 5 brands of cigarettes. They took us to Lucky Strike, Camp Lucky Strike. They fed us there for 5 or 6 weeks, possibly 7 weeks, because we were all grossly underweight, and they didn't want to take us home looking like that. The next question.
I understood from that then you went by ship back to England.
Yeah,
And
no,
then
we didn't go to England.
You went straight.
We bypassed England and went straight to Boston Harbor.
You mentioned it was interesting to me because I'd never heard about this. You said as many as 11,000 troops were being carried on one ship called the Aquitania.
Yes, Aquitania was, I guess, it was a sister ship to the Lusitania, which had hit an iceberg and sunk years earlier. But that was the biggest ship, so we were told, that America had, and it held 11,000 men plus their crew. And let me tell you a little something more about that. We didn't have an escort. That ship was fast enough that we could outrun U-boats, German submarines. We made it across the Atlantic alone and made it in record time. Well, not records for Aquitania, but for everybody else.
When you came back to the United States, did you stay in the military very long after that? Were you discharged or what happened?
I can't remember just how long I stayed in, but it wasn't voluntary. Some of them that were not injured left almost immediately. So that's the reason I said it wasn't voluntary on my part. They sent me to a hospital, military hospital, and I stayed there several weeks. I can't remember how long. I had a bad back injury, and my nerves were shot, still are. and had a few more things wrong with me. They doctored me up and got me in shape to board the ship to go home.
When you got back to the U.S., did you stay in the military or did they discharge you?
Now, that is what I was talking about. I went to military hospital in the United States. Now, you asked a question and I misinterpreted it. I gave you a wrong answer.
That's okay. Hey, you're not hooked up to a lie detector test, okay?
We were sent home for a 60-day furlough, which was also for recuperation purposes. After we had already been to the hospital and gotten somewhat better. So it would add up to maybe 3 months that I got out sometime in November.
Of 1945?
Yes.
Of course, that was after Germany had surrendered and Japan had surrendered.
Yes. They surrendered while I was in that hospital.
All of your crew of 10 made it back?
All of us made it back.
Did y'all ever get together after that?
Yes, we had a crew reunion in Hoopston, Illinois, at the home of our waist gunner, who was also, excuse me, he was also my best friend.
Well, that's good. That was good to be able to see him again, wasn't it?
Yes. 6 of us, or 7 maybe, out of the 10 made it to that reunion. The others couldn't for various reasons. I said that Kurt Campbell, our host for that crew reunion, was my best friend. He was all the way through, except in prison camp, through training in the United States before we went overseas, and also after we got back from overseas. And he and his wife visited us at Bartman. He was from Hoopston, Illinois, and that's where we had our crew reunion.
Let me ask you a question, something that you told me that I may have heard, but I'm not sure I remembered it. Of course, some of your crew were officers, correct?
4
And
officers and 6 enlisted men.
did they keep the officers in a different POW camp from the enlisted men?
Yes, they did. They got somewhat better treatment, and got more food. Conditions were just better for the officers because they were officers.
Were they part of this forced march? Did they get back together with y'all when they started moving the camp, or were they at another location?
They were in another location. I don't know what their camp number was even. We never did get back together until that crew reunion at Kurt Campbell's house.
So 6 of you were in Stalag 17, and the four officers were in a different camp.
Yes.
I guess it's hard for us who've not been in those circumstances to even imagine what you went through. But what would you say was the most difficult part of all of the stuff that you went through?
There was nothing easy, but the shortage of food was by far the main drawback to prison camp. And I want to say on the Germans' behalf, they did the best they could. They didn't have food enough themselves. And I suppose we got as much food as the German civilians did. Germany was on that last leg for a long time.
So y'all were not tortured by the Germans?
No. There was one incident, and we brought it on ourselves. The tech sergeant, who was the American in charge of that camp, because we had Germans in charge of it, but we took some orders from him, but they were handed down from the Germans. He told us one night, told all of the barracks full of Americans not to get out of bed for roll call the next morning. It was a lie down strike. If you know what sit down strikes are. Well, this was actually we just stayed in bed. The German guards couldn't get us out of bed. So after about 15 minutes, in walked some SS troops. We got out of bed. I was one of the last ones to get out of bed. And an SS trooper with a bayonet affixed to his rifle came down with that rifle, right, aiming to kill me. I rolled over in that bunk. We didn't have beds, we had wooden bunks. I rolled over quick enough that that bayonet didn't touch me, didn't even pin my clothes. And I rolled out the other side, grabbed my shoes, and out in the snow I went. Put the shoes on after I got outside.
So y'all learned pretty quickly, do what they told you to when they told you to.
We knew what SS meant after that. I don't remember now what it was, but it meant a particularly mean German.
They were the stormtroopers.
That's right.
That's what they called them. They were the most violent, and
Yes,
and their doctrine was far different from the normal military.
that's right. That's right.
How many of your number are still alive now?
I don't know. The only one I know about is that friend of mine, Kurt Campbell, and he has not dementia, but the worst, Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm.
He has Alzheimer's. He has been hospitalized for a year or two now, and I don't contact him because he wouldn't remember me if I called him.
I think everybody would like to know, how old are you now?
I'm 92, born in 1923.
You've lived a full life, haven't
Yes, I have.
you? And you're fortunate to be here.
God has